Hi, welcome everyone. I'm Amanda Kristinat, and I'm currently the Vice President of Finance and Operations with Moonshot at NASET. Grants are a passion of mine, and I've also brought that to Moonshot as well. And so today we're going to be talking about demystifying grants. I've always kind of thought of grants as like an old family recipe where it's kind of shrouded in mystery and you're waiting for your great grandmother to give you the secret ingredients, but it's really not as crazy or as secret as it really sounds. All right, well now we're moving on to the grant category. So I'm just going to hit real lightly on these today. And there's several types of grants, and I know a lot of people get confused about what types of grants there are and how should you write for those grants. So the types of grants we have are general operating, project, nonprofit, and for-profit. And so the general operating is typically a grant when you can write it for anything operational. They don't care if it's for staff, they don't care if it's for a project, it's for anything that you do operationally wise. Those are the best grants to find and get. Unfortunately, project grants are the most common grants that are out there, which means they're looking to fund a very specific grant project. Whether it's, I'm going to feed 400 homeless people this holiday season. Whatever the project is, they're looking to fund those specific items. We also, of course, most people think of a nonprofit grant, and that's how you get grants, is you have to be a nonprofit. That, of course, is another big common one, but also for-profit grants, which means if you are a for-profit company, you do have the opportunity to receive a grant. Sometimes, though, the grants have to be funneled through a nonprofit organization, such as Moonshot at NASET. We actually provide and are a fiscal agent for several for-profit organizations here in Flagstaff and across the state that allows them to have the monies come to us, and then we funnel it through to the for-profit company. All right, so now we're jumping to type of grant writing. So there's typically two types, which is a technical or a formal grant writing. Those types are typically for scientific grants, or when they've asked for 5-10 pages of just direct writing about your project or your organization. The most common is actually your succinct or question and answer grants, and those are where they ask you a series of questions and you're allotted a certain space to answer those questions. Then we jump into applications, which can also be very confusing for grant writers. So there's typically three types. There's letter of inquiry, full proposal, and letter proposal. Now the letter of inquiry are a little bit different. That means the grantor does not generally just give out grants or say, here's the application, anyone can apply that qualifies. You actually have to write a letter of inquiry to the funder and say, I'm interested in your grants, and I would be interested in applying, and here's how my organization aligns with your mission for funding. If they accept your inquiry, they'll send you back the information for you to apply. If they do not, they'll send you back a no thank you letter. Then you jump into the full proposal, which can be anywhere from 2 to hundreds of pages, depending on what kind of grant you're applying for. And that's basically where you're giving every piece of information that they've asked for. There's a lot of attachments, there's lots of questions, there could be essays, there could be a variety of different ways that they're asking you to give the information they're wanting. And then a letter proposal, which is typically anywhere from 1 to 5 pages. And it's just asking you to write about your organization and to write about your proposal and submit that without any additional information. All right, well now we're going to jump into the instructions of grants. And basically this is really interesting. It's kind of like a lot of people get something to build and they don't read the instructions and wonder why it didn't work out. So here the instructions, again, it's kind of like that recipe. You got to follow it. So review your grant requirements, your instructions. Make sure you qualify, make sure your organization and mission align with what the grantor is looking for. These are all very important. Make sure you have the time and the energy to put into that grant and meet all those requirements. And if you have questions, I know it comes up a little bit later, but you can call and ask for verification. And the next we have is assemble your team. It sounds simple and sounds easy, but sometimes people forget to include key people within their team for what they need for their grant. You need who's ever going to handle your finances and the budget portion of your grant. You're going to need your grant and project manager. You're going to need whoever is kind of in charge. Typically the CEO or the executive director is going to be a part of this grant as well. So it's really important to have the whole team together and on board with this grant and review the grant applications to make sure everyone's ready to go. The next we have is to get organized. And when you get organized, you sound like you've already been starting to do some of that stuff. Yes, you have. And the great part about getting organized is this part is where you lay out your plan. If this is really an intensive grant that you have, this is the time when you are really laying out a schedule, a timeline, making sure that you have and can obtain all those documents that you need and the information that you need in a timely manner to go forward with the grant and meet that deadline. And then of course we're going to move down to researching the grantor. And I really think that this one is one that a lot of people forget. So if you're, let's say, what do you call it? SunWest Bank is one of your grantors that you're going to look into. Look and see who they funded previously. Try and find out those projects and what it looks like. Have they funded projects or organizations similar to yours? Look to see who's on their board. Look to see what's really going on with that organization and what they support within the community to see if you really have a good chance or can align some of what you're going to be writing in your grant towards some of those things that they're looking for. And then we have start that project planning. And like I said, most grants are project-based. If you're lucky enough to have one that is not project-based, then please move forward, and still you have to plan out what you're going to do, how you're going to say it, how am I going to present my organization in a way that I'm going to be able to get the operational funding that I want. But if not, then you are looking at that really intense project planning. And that piece is really about, is my project aligning with the organization, with the mission, and with all those pieces that the grantor is looking for, as well as making sure that you've plotted out a budget and plotted out all the pieces and the information that are going to line up with what you have to write in that grant. And then the biggest tip for this piece is do not create a project just for a grant to get funded. And there's several reasons for this. One, they typically ask for how is this going to be sustainable afterwards, after you've gotten that grant funding. And if it's not something that's within your normal scope, it can be difficult to continue that sustainability. And you also don't want to overstretch yourself by taking on another project on top of what you're already doing and then realize that you don't have the capacity to move forward with it, even though you receive the funding for it. And so that kind of really lines into your clarifying your outputs and outcomes. And this one can be definitely tricky. A lot of people get really confused with what's an output, what's an outcome. And to put it very simply, is your output is solid numbers, measurable numbers that you're providing. So being able to say, I fed 453 Thanksgiving meals to the homeless shelter. We gave 80 books to the Boys and Girls Club. Those are your outputs. Those are actual numbers that you can report. They're very easily and very measurable. Your outcomes are a little bit more tricky. And those outcomes are really about what is the potential behavioral changes that you want to see with your program? Or is it going to be the number of kids that graduate from high school, even though there's a number in there, but it's increasing that number. You want them to go on to college. Those are kind of the outcome pieces as opposed to the numbers behind it. And it can be very interesting, can be tricky as you're working through your grant and to align all those outcomes and outputs within your grant and your project. And so those are very important pieces. Then the best part is we start to answer questions. We've gathered all that information and we're really going to start answering those questions. And it doesn't have to be formally. I actually like to take a lot of my grant applications, especially when they're digital, and copy and paste all the questions into a Word document and then just start drafting those questions. And that way you can edit. You don't have to worry about you're touching the actual grant application, especially since some are submitted online. And you can also distribute them, put them on Google Docs, and you can share them, and people can really share and edit and make it a document that's kind of living for that time being, and really start to answer and draft out those questions. And really that will help you see any holes that you have and be, oh wow, I didn't even realize I can't answer this question. I need assistance or help, or I need to find that information. And so it's really important to find that information out and get it beforehand when you're, a day before trying to answer all the questions, and you're really looking for all that information. So it's at your fingertips when you apply. And then one of the best pieces, my favorite, love finances, is build your own budget. Building your budget is vital to any grant. And the biggest thing with the grant is it needs to be the same and tell the same story as you're telling in your grant proposal, which I know that sounds weird, but if you are writing a project grant, and let's say your grant, your whole project is going to cost $40,000. So you're asking $20,000 from who you're going for this specific grant, and you've already gotten $20,000 pledged from another grant. Well, you write that grant for the full $40,000, showing that you have other people funding your grant for you, as opposed to just writing it for $20,000 in your budget. You want that full budget picture. You want to tell the same story with all your projects, all the information, and not just cut and paste from your current budget. I know a lot of people will just submit their current budget for their project budget, but there is a difference between those two. And a lot of times grants will even ask you to submit both a project and a full company budget as well. So then we roll down to gathering required documents. And these documents can be things such as your audited financial statements. It can be your board roster. It can be your 990 taxes. It can be letters of support from organizations or participants to your past or current programs. And so those are all very important to make sure that whatever they have asked for, those additional documents are there and ready even before you're working on submitting your grant. All right, and now we're up to the top. It's getting exciting as we're moving all the way down. So reach out with questions. This is another one that a lot of people really forget. And basically, it's the idea behind you're stuck, you don't quite know how to answer a question, or you don't understand an instruction within your grant. You can actually call. Most of them have an email address, a phone number, something to where you can actually call and reach out to that organization and ask some basic questions and get a little bit of feedback. They're not going to give you a lot of leading in or a lot of help, but they're going to be able to answer your questions, and they're going to be able to give you some direction on how you need to proceed with what it is that you're looking for. Or let's say you don't have audited financial statements. That's a big one. Some organizations are small and they don't have those. You can actually say, can we not submit them? You know, they can help you through that process. If they say, sorry, that's something that you have to have, then it's better to know now than to keep going forward if you can't apply. Then again, some of the plotting out additional attachments. This can be a little bit more fun, I think, for some organizations. A lot of times grants will just say, you know, give additional information, such as you can put photos, you can add stories, you can do testimonies, you can do a lot of different activities that you've done, and those are just plotting out some of those little bit funner activities than the standard grant information that you have to provide. All right, well now we're getting to an extremely important one that I think a lot of people forget, and that is actually have others review your proposal. And I think a lot of people think, well, I did. I had the secretary edit it, I had the finance guy review the budget, but this is really about having someone outside your organization look at the proposal. And there's a big reason for this, and that reason is because if they can understand your proposal and not really know much about your organization, you have done a great job. And so that's one of those pieces to where if they've read it and they don't know what you're doing, or they don't understand what you're even going for, your grant or anything, then you have some more work to do on your proposal. And it's very important that you have clarity through your documentation. And we'll get to a little bit further detail on that coming up on the next slide, but it's really important to have someone outside the organization review this proposal for you. Then the next step is, the next few steps are actually pretty easy. Put everything together. You're going to get everything organized from that you've created, your documents, your proposal, photos, any attachments, and you're going to put it in the format that they've requested. And then you're going to have a final review with your team, and your team's going to sit and just make sure that everything's present, you've met every requirement, and you've got everything ready to submit. Once you've done that, you can finalize and submit your grant. That's the simplest and the easiest part of all the granting. It's not. The simplest part is the celebration that you guys are going to do after you've completed this grant. Now, I have done grants that have been 1 pages, and I have done grants that have been 150 pages. So trust me, that celebration comes in huge when you've completed a grant that's 150 pages with your team. Then, unfortunately, you have to wait for your notification, and that can be anywhere from weeks to months, unfortunately. But it's really great when you finally get that notification and you've got that grant. All right, now we're working on to the best part of any recipe, the ingredients. Everybody loves the ingredients that go into that recipe, and so this part of the recipe for a grant is all kind of the meat and potatoes of everything. And so here, the biggest one, and it is at top for a reason, and we touched on it a little bit on the last slide, and we're going to touch on it again in a future slide, is answer the questions. Now, I know that might seem a little silly, but I have seen so many people get denied grants because they actually did not answer the question that was asked. They start to write with flowery language. They start to talk about all these other things or other pieces of the organization or the proposal or the project, and they don't simply answer the question. And a lot of people sometimes feel like if they've given you 500 words that you can write, you can answer the question, if you can, in 200. They're not going to sit and go, wow, they didn't answer all those. They didn't use the whole space. They didn't answer the question. If you can answer it succinctly and quickly, that's actually your best choice of action. You want to add just the right amount of information, whether it's technical or emotional, and get that answer out on the paper without too much extra information. Then the next step is clearly identify the problem, who it affects, why the problem exists, how you're solving the problem, and why your solution works. And I know even whether you're a business or a nonprofit, it's all about solving a problem. And so these pieces are very important. If you can't clearly identify what you're planning on doing, that shows a lack of either preparation or planning or knowledge about what you're actually looking to do. And so it's really important to be able to answer all of these questions about the problem that you're solving. Then, we mentioned this again, this is another piece, tell the same story in your budget. So your budget does need to mimic your project or whatever it is that you're trying to do. And so if it's a project budget, you have to show whether it's for staff, how much is for your project, what's going to the kids, what's going towards each individual item that they've requested information on. And it needs to match, really match what you're asking for, and that matches the project information or your operational organization. And again, if you have matching funds or funds from an outside source, then that is also something that needs to be included in that budget story. Now we're going to look for keywords and phrases through the grant. That's another extremely important one. So you're writing a grant for people that they know what they're looking for. And most places, that going for it, they know what they're looking for, they know what they want, they have an idea of the mission and connectivity that they're looking for in your proposal. And so go through that grant application, see what information you can pull out, and use some of that similar language, words or phrases within your project proposal. And that way you can really connect on the same level with your grantor within your grant proposal. And that's very important to do with whether you're a teacher, whether you're presenting in front of an audience. You have to connect with your audience. And this is partly how you can connect with your audience, is using some of the same language that they use in their writing. So then we jump down to appropriate writing styles, which again goes back to that writing style. Look at how they've written that grant proposal, choosing the correct words and messaging that kind of connects everything through your grant. And a lot of times grants will be written by several different people and put all together when you have a team helping. You want to make sure that that writing style and language is the same throughout. So if you have someone who's your finance director writing something within there, make sure that the main writing style is still reflected within that financial piece of it as well. Even some of the technical terms might be different for the finance, but you still want to make sure that it's cohesive and everything is really well connected. The other big thing that I love, and these kind of next two kind of go hand in hand a little bit, is grab their attention. Grab the people's attention with stories, with emotion. And I'll give you a little bit of example. If I was writing a grant for a choir, and I was going to just say, we love singing, the kids love to sing, it's wonderful, music, it's great. Music is great, everyone will agree, but it's not emotionally pulling. It's not an emotional story. Oh, the concerts are beautiful. Those are not emotional pieces. It would be different to sit and take a story from that and say, you know what, this 10-year-old child came in, 10 years old, super shy, barely sang. She's been in the choir for 8 years now. She's a senior in high school. She just sang her first solo and has such confidence and poise and just received a singing scholarship to Cornell University. That is more of an emotional connection than just talking about the music. So even though you might think, well, it's just about the music, there's stories within your organization that you can tap into and pull out those emotional and attention-grabbing stories. And it's important to find those. Which then kind of jumps down, like I said, the next one is titles are a lot of times overlooked, and yet they can grab people's attention right off the get-go. And so when you have a grant application, you usually put a title at the top, and a lot of times people put 2021 Moonshot grant application, and that's all they put, when they could start and be Imaginarium Incubator. Well, that grabs people's attention right away. Well, what in the world is that? And so it's important to not overlook even the smallest detail on ways that you can impact your grant reader and really capture their attention or capture those emotional pieces. All right, and then we're going to talk to next, not as much of a fun topic, but it's that addressing that partial funding. And partial funding is two different pieces. So you have the partial funding where the grantor might ask you a question and say, what happens if we don't give you the full funding you're requesting? And you have to address that information. It can be a difficult question to ask because sometimes we want to just say, well, then I can't do the project. But that's not what they're looking for. They're looking for, we might have to reduce the number of people that we're serving, or I would look for additional ways to find funding. And I know people are scared sometimes to say those things because they don't want them to go, oh, well, we'll just give them half the funding. They can do it without us. And but it's really important to address all of those issues and really look at that information. Then the other piece of that partial funding is actually something that we talked about previously, and that was talking about if your budget for the project is $40,000 and you're asking for 20 and you have someone else funding the 20, make sure that is all reflected. It really looks good on your proposal to see that other people are actually putting money into this project on top of just the money that you've asked from the current grant application you're working through. So these are all very important meat and potatoes of the grant process. And so now we're going to jump over to the other side. And this is talking about, some of these are going to be real simple, highlighting your partnerships and collaborations. Grants love to see that you're working with other organizations, or you're working with, whether it's they're funding you or whether you're actually partnering with another organization to help fulfill the needs of your mission. And so anything you can think of, put those things down. It looks great. It's like padding your resume, as they say. And then, of course, you have your measurable outcomes and your evaluation. Make sure that the things that you're putting down for your outputs and your outcomes are actually measurable and they're quantifiable. Sometimes things are difficult to measure, so make sure you get to usually set those for yourself and your organization. And if you say you're going to do a survey at the end of this program to the parents and the children, then make sure that you have that set up and you have that in place and you've included that as part of your measurables and your evaluation piece. That is actually becoming more and more prevalent for grantors who are really analyzing that outcomes and measurability and the evaluation piece of it. They really want to make sure that the money they're giving you is being used for what they had intended it, and they want to see those numbers typically and that information in a final report at the end of this. All right. Again, here you can see some reoccurring themes. We have others review for different opinions, and this again I'm looking for outside of your organization reviews. Anytime something comes up more than once, you know it's important. And so it's one of those things to where it is really important because it really helps with clarity and it helps with just making sure that it's understandable, because you're going to have, oh gosh, I've had panels of 50 people to reading and analyzing your grant proposals. They need to be able to understand it, and they don't know everything about your organization. So they need to be able to read that information that you're giving them and know and understand your organization enough to say, I want to give those people some funding. Another fun one that we've got here is turning negatives into positives. And I know that can be kind of hard to think about, but at the same time, it's really one of those pieces that, bad things happen to organizations all the time. And it's really about saying, you know what, we made this mistake, but on the flip side, we learned from the mistake, and this is how we've potentially rebounded. Or we lost this funding, we had to cut programs, so our numbers don't look good this year, but we're rebuilding, we've gotten this, we've gotten X, Y, and Z, and we've put some new things in place that have helped us be more flexible in the future with funding. And so it's one of those pieces to where it is important that you address some of those negative and positives if it's a question that's come up that you have to answer and refer to, and try to put some sort of positive information in there as well, that you've learned something. All right, and another difficult one coming up here is addressing sustainability. And this one is a lot of times different for people because they get that same grant year after year after year, sometimes for that same program, or they maybe don't know how it's going to continue after they receive this funding to go into the next year. So it's one of those things you can't just say, I'll get more grants. They want a little bit more thought into this. You can say, we could always, look for more grants. We're looking at a different funding cycle that will fund this specific project. Maybe there'll be a fee now associated with it after the first year that will help, or we have corporate sponsors who are going to do matches for the future that after we get this program rolling. So they're looking to see that you've thought about this in the future and not just stopped right with what you're doing right here and now. And so they're looking for that forward thought and what you're going to do if for some reason funding is not available next year for this organization. All right, another good piece to highlight in any grant is why. Why is your organization the one that should be doing this? And I know that can seem silly, I run a youth program and we should be the best at this, but they really want to know why it's your organization that should be funded for that youth program over potentially another youth organization. What makes you stand out from your competitors? And in this piece, you don't want to say negative things about your competitors. I have seen people do that to where they have just completely destroyed their competition in a sense, that is not appropriate. You can say it without saying anything bad about your competitor or who your competitors are. It's really just highlighting how you're different and what makes you best at what you do. And it could be staffing, it could be the variety of programs, it could be so many different little small things you don't even think about that really make your company stand out. All right, and so this next one is actually a really important one that a lot of people forget about, and that is funders are people too. Make it easy. Make it easy for them to read your proposal. There was one grant I applied for, and I think they had $1 million to give, and they had over $40 million worth of applications. So they had thousands and thousands of applications, and they actually do read through them. So you think about writing this grant, and that potentially thousands of people are going to be reading this grant depending on what kind of grant you're going for. These people are typically volunteers who are grant reviewers that are doing this through a foundation or an organization, and they are trying to read through all these grants. So it's really important to be succinct, make it easy on them, and to be really clear and have clear language that they can understand and get through. As well as even making sure you, like I said, when you're answering that question, answer that question right at the beginning of the paragraph. So some people will be skimmers. They're looking for those keywords and phrases, and they are looking for being able to see that you were able to answer their question within the first few sentences of your answer. And so that right there is definitely a big one to look at. All right, and then the other piece is if you don't get funded through this process, you can ask for feedback. The majority of grant organizations, you can call them, or when they send you the email saying, sorry you didn't get anything, you can email back, says, is there any way I can get any feedback? And most of them will happily give it to you. They have a score sheet. It's not going to be hugely detailed, but, a lot of times they have a score sheet, or, we didn't feel this was strong, or your clarity was weak. And so it's one of those pieces to where it is an important feedback, especially if you want to go back to that grantor potentially maybe the next year. And we also have, with that same piece is, there are some organizations that actually allow you to watch the granting process. And it's a fascinating thing to watch and to kind of see. So it's important to ask those questions to see if you can actually sit and watch the recorded versions of it. So that is it for the ingredients, and we're going to move on to just some quick tips for success. These are going to be quick, not a lot of lengthy information. They are some things that we have already discussed. Actually, probably most of them are things that we've already discussed, but these are just kind of like my top 10 takeaways for success for writing a grant. And the number one is answer the question, because it needs to be succinct and it needs to be clear. And then we run down to use short, clear paragraphs, which again goes back to that making things clear and succinct and easy for the reader, and just for clarity overall of your application. Another one is edit, 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 and I'll say it again, edit. Just because you can never edit too much in this sense, just making sure you've got a great solid proposal going in. Again, write so anyone can understand. Again, you can kind of see a theme through a lot of these, are kind of with that clarity and answering the questions, and that you are writing clearly and succinctly so anybody could understand. Have someone unfamiliar read your proposal, another big one. You can see which ones I've pulled from the previous slides that are super important here. Tell a good story. Stories will grab people's attention and they will grab people's emotions, and those are all big for trying to connect to get funding. People really want to make a difference with the monies that they're giving, and so this is definitely a really important one. Which moves down to that next one of connecting with an emotional level, including quotes, real stories, anything you can think of that will help you connect to the grantor and to their mission and connect on any level possible. And then be data driven and focused on your impact. A lot of people, they focus too much on the emotional piece and then they don't really give any directive data in it. But as I said before in one of the previous, data is becoming more and more important to grantors. They really want to see those outcomes and outputs and the information that's backing up your surveys, or they want to see data about, well, are there really that many homeless people in your area and why do you need to provide this extra food? That backup data to why your problem is your problem and how you're solving it. All right, and again, make your point at the beginning of each paragraph for skimmers. I am a skimmer, so this is definitely something really important to me, and I actually have sat on grant review panels, and it's not that you get inundated with so many of them, and it's not that you don't want to read it all, but when you get the information, it makes you want to read further. You know, whoa, that grabbed my attention. What is that? Let me finish reading, as opposed to, okay, skim, got the information. Okay, yeah, this one can go through. Sometimes that having that information right up front says, wow, these people know what they're doing. I'm going to read a little bit further into this. So it's kind of a two-prong approach. It covers for that skimmer that may not read, but it also might grab their attention and make them read more. And that's really what you want to get. You want to grab their attention and answer that question enough to where they're going to be pulled in and read further and read that whole thing. And then this one we didn't talk about at all. Is brand all your documents. And that's just because we didn't really address it too much in the beginning, and it's really just because it's one of those things to where a lot of people forget it. It's very simple. Everything that you give, when you give your proposal, should look like your organization. And taking your branding, your logos on it, you know, whatever it is, if you have to write a letter, your letterheads on it, whatever those pieces are, just make sure everything's branded and really concise and collected. All right, and that concludes my 10 tips for success for a grant. And we're going to move on to the last slide, which is just where to find grants. And this one isn't necessarily something I'm going to talk through a whole bunch. It is really about giving you some resources and places to go. General Google searches, that's where I actually Google search so much of my grants that I've gone for. Grants for music, education. You know, you'll just plop in whatever you want. The only one that can be a little bit tricky actually is the last one, the corporate philanthropic pages. And I put that philanthropic in there because a lot of times, let's say you wanted to do a grant through, I'm just trying to think of a large company, Intel Corporation. And you're like, all right, you type in Intel, well, you're going to get their business website. You're not going to get their philanthropic pages. So type in Intel Philanthropic or Intel Community Giving. And that will pull up their granting sites or what they do for their community. And so those are the pieces, the little tidbits of information that are great. Other great sources are your local regional organizations, city, county, civic organizations, community foundations within your area for funding. And again, those ones you can just look up and then look at their pages and what grant options that they have available. And then the other ones are paid resources, which is grants.gov, grantwatch.com, and then the Foundation Center Catalog of Federal Domestic Assistance. That's a mouthful, and I know it kind of almost sounds like it's not even something that you would want to look at, but it actually is a huge government catalog of a variety of different grants that you can have to look for. And a lot of these paid ones, you can look for the grants. You just can't click on the More button to find the grant or get the more information about the grant, but sometimes it'll tell you the organization, then you can go to their website and look up the grant directly through the organization as opposed to going through the paid website. But I actually am a firm believer a lot of these grant paid websites are wonderful and worth the subscription if you really are applying for a lot of grants. It's a great resource to have at your fingertips. All right, well, thanks for hanging with me, guys. I know that was a lot of information to take in right now. So I really want to say thank you for hanging in there. The big thing I think you can take away from this is that grants are not as hard as they seem. It just takes a little extra planning, some detail orientation, and really making sure you've got a great proposal. And I think that the big thing you guys need to do right now is to go look for some funding and go start something.